the deal. I was originally going to do one of those things where I did a non-spoiler sort of short video for this movie before we did like the discussion between the two of us, but that didn't end up happening. And honestly, I don't think we really need to. This can just be the definitive non-spoiler and spoiler review. And even with those two parts, we're both pretty confident that this is going to be one of the shorter discussion videos we do. I don't think there's all that much that either of us are going to disagree on about this movie, but we're talking about Joker, and this is definitely going to be a little bit of a hot take. Well, we'll just. So I already. I've based on just some things that you've said and like my experience with this movie. Let's just open with immediately the big thing, which is this movie is not at all worth or deserving of, or like worth and deserving aren't maybe the right words, but this is not the movie that earned like the big massive ongoing controversy about it, of like placing cops at theaters and is it gonna incite violence. Like, no, that's not this movie, agreed?
Yeah,
Yeah, this
and
it's
but to be fair, I don't think any movie could necessarily, quote unquote, be that movie. I think
yeah, no.
people who, this is like an entirely, not entirely separate, but this is a bit of a different conversation. But the people who go out and like shoot up schools and that kind of thing, they're going to do that with or without the influence of a freaking movie.
Yeah. Like the thing is, I was determined before seeing this movie to have this discussion without even mentioning this, but I find it oddly like more relevant to mention it now just because it's so not reflective of the actual movie. And like I'll leave my comments about it, just how ridiculous this whole thing is at this. From the beginning, this was stupid, and like I believe that the seed that eventually grew into this big dumb tree started from the right place, of people wondering like, is doing a Joker movie where he's the protagonist maybe going to help normalize some potentially harmful like viewpoints or whatever. That is a decent enough, I suppose, concern to have. Not with the movie as it actually ended up being, which we'll get into, but
Hmm.
the thing that I always like keep in mind, and which, you know, studies have even been done about this, like media does not really directly impact behaviors all that much. Media is really bad at making people perform certain behaviors, but really good at making people hold certain worldviews. So if your concern is like a movie like Joker or whatever might negatively impact someone's perception of things, then fine, we can debate about that. But if this is the same thing with the video game thing, where if your argument is this violent piece of media is going to make people perform acts of violence, that's just not how the human brain has been proven to work. Like that's not even worth debating.
It's not. I've been watching horror movies since before I could talk, and I haven't gone out and tried to murder anyone with a knife or a chainsaw or an axe.
Yeah, no, and like there's actually a whole episode of BoJack Horseman about this, which I love, where like they go out of their way to be like, no, media's not gonna make you do bad things, but it can maybe normalize the existence of bad things for you. And that is a legit concern. But again, now to actually talk about the movie, I don't think this movie was ever gonna do that. Where like from the beginning, since it was pitched, basically the go-to comparison points have been like Taxi Driver and King of Comedy and old Scorsese movies like that. And it's like, yeah, this is very much in line with one of those movies. I'd even say it's much less violent than something like Taxi Driver. Like it's you had a whole Facebook post about this, and this is exactly how I feel. It's remarkable how tame this movie is in terms of both the acts of violence that happen on screen and just what it's trying to say, since I don't think I don't think this movie even has the potentially negatively influencing worldviews thing, because I don't think this movie is really saying anything. And if it is saying anything, I think it's really simplistic and kind of hollow and shallow. And like, I started this wrong. I should have started this by saying I like this movie. I do like this movie quite a bit. It's probably not in my top 3 comic book movies of this year, but I think it's really solid the whole way through. It's occasionally, in token moments, even great, but for the most part, I feel like it's kind of shot in the foot, not just by the controversy, because that's not the movie's fault, but also like Todd Phillips, his attitude about it, the way the movie kind of sells itself is like, this is a big, different, like, edgy thing, and like, it is different. Like, okay, I'm gonna say something that might be a little weird, but it's a thought that occurred to me earlier this morning, and it's kind of stuck with me. To me, this movie is most comparable, as far as comic book movies go, to Ant-Man, the first one, where I think they're both really solid movies that are only great in like certain moments, and I'm glad that they both exist because they do some much needed genre experimentation, where going forward I think people are gonna keep incrementally doing like different genre stuff under this umbrella, and comic book movies are allowed to feel different, just like we got with Logan, just like we got with Deadpool. But at the same time, I feel like with this and Ant-Man, neither of those movies go as far as they should, and story-wise, they're really kind of hollow, shallow things. And yeah, this is one of those movies that kind of seems like it's acting like it has a lot to say, and it really doesn't.
Yeah, it plays it really safe in that it's playing with politics, but chooses to be firmly apolitical. Joker himself, I don't know if he uses that exact word, but he's essentially apolitical.
There's a line where
Like they talk about both sides, but they conveniently don't pick one.
like, yeah, the Joker slash Arthur in this movie has a line of dialogue where he's like, "I don't believe in anything." When they're like, "Is this like a protest thing that you believe in?" It's like, I feel like that's indicative of the movie itself, and
Yeah,
I've seen people make the argument that that's fitting because it's like it's the Joker. He's all about chaos, and this is a guy who slowly becomes more chaotic. Where like he doesn't need a guiding philosophy, and so the movie doesn't need that either. And like, no, the most interesting versions of the Joker have a guiding philosophy. Maybe they don't always speak to it, but it's clear in their actions. Like Ledger's Joker has that. The animated series Joker has that. The Gotham game Jokers have that, and it's, yeah, I don't know. This is very much a movie where I don't think it's saying anything, and like you mentioned, the politics, the big sort of political issue that is like running in the background of this movie is the first real act of violence that the Joker commits is killing 3 guys on the subway, and that's like the majority of his victims. I'm pretty sure in this movie he kills like a total of 5 people, and
that's
it's,
correct.
yeah,
He
and it's
kills
all,
the three bratty rich kids on the subway, and then he kills one of his ex clown coworkers, and then he kills the talk show guy.
yeah, and like, yeah, that's the first spoilery thing, but I'm honestly kind of iffy on even labeling this a spoiler review, just because there are a couple of big twists in this movie, and I'll grant it that those 2 twists that I'm thinking of in particular are pretty effective. But a lot of stuff that happens in this movie, I think you can call as soon as like the elements are introduced,
The
especially
big
if,
thing for me being Zazie Beet's character.
yeah, and especially if you've seen um what is it, The King of Comedy, then like where they're going with Robert De Niro's character and that whole subplot is, I think, easy to call. But yeah, it's like it's mainly just, yeah, it's gun violence and one stabbing death, and that's really it. But yeah, so he kills the 3 Wall Street guys who are working for Thomas Wayne, and that sort of indirectly creates this whole kill the rich movement. And someone pointed out, I think it was in the Shea Frillis video, where it's like, yeah, I'm not even sure that that would happen. Like, I'll give the movie it's a gimme, and I'll give it to the movie as like a suspension of disbelief. All right, fine. But really thinking about it, if you wanted to have that complaint where it's like, what a random guy in a clown mask kills three Wall Street guys, and that single act alone is enough to incite like a whole anti-rich, anti-capitalist like movement among the people of Gotham, I'm not sure that that works entirely.
Yeah, that's fair.
But like, yeah, that's not even a real problem. My real problem is just that the movie doesn't seem like it's saying anything with that. Like the movie itself, the narrative doesn't take any kind of anti-capitalist, pro-rich, anti-rich stance. It just has a what it really amounts to is it just has a bunch of extras throughout the second and third acts with that philosophy who are sort of just there to give Arthur slash Joker the validation that he wants. And I don't know, I feel like it's a real missed opportunity to not actually if you're going to have the Joker be like a figurehead of a movement, whether or not the character cares about that, I feel like the movie should care a little bit and have something to say with that.
Um, I guess that's a fair complaint. I don't really know if it's a necessity at the end of the day. Although I will say this does amount to pretty much like what I complain about a lot with um what are they called? Those nonfiction biopics where it's like
Ah,
stuff happens in the movie where
yeah.
you see a whole bunch of um random events that do kind of intertwine, but you're kind of just watching stuff happen. You're not really watching a narrative.
Yeah, I won't quite go that far, but I can totally get the feeling that you're talking about, where it's not necessarily all random because it is like these
It all
narratives.
links back to that exciting incident.
Yeah, and it is all in service of like these narratives tend to be in service of pushing this poor schmuck to the breaking point. This is one of those guy gets beat on by the world until he just decides screw it and becomes terrible movies. And it's like the fact that I'm able to say that kind of underlies the problem. It's just that I feel like there are a bunch of other movies like this, and this one isn't appreciably better than any of them. Like, I prefer The King of Comedy to this by a long shot. I prefer Taxi Driver to this by a long shot. It's a really well directed movie. The score is great. The performances all around are really
The
good.
score is really good. It's really haunting.
Yeah, and Joaquin Phoenix in particular. Like, I feel like this is. I feel like there are a lot of camps for this movie, and we are speaking to a very firmly established camp that is everything about this movie is really good, except not necessarily the story. The story doesn't have all that much meat on its bones, and that's really just how I feel about it. Where
Uh, yeah, I'll say this. I do not buy into the whole "this is a masterpiece. This is the best movie of the year" thing.
no,
I don't have that at all. I will say, Walking Phoenix maybe deserves Best Actor.
if this got best actor or best editing or maybe best like directing from a
Cinematography.
yeah cinematography. If this got cinematography or best actor, then I would be all for that. Best Picture, like some people have suggested this for Best Picture, no. And like
No,
this is coming from someone who was fully in support of Black Panther being nominated. I don't think Black Panther should have won because that was a really good year, but I was fine with Black Panther being nominated for Best Picture. I think that movie earned it. I just don't feel it with this one. Like Black Panther was a movie that had things to say and it said them clearly and interestingly, and this movie just doesn't have all that much.
yeah, I
And
mean, you don't necessarily have to have a big mission statement
no,
with your movie, or like you have to put out a message necessarily.
not
Um,
necessarily, no.
but
And you don't want to be
first
like
and
soapboxy about it. You don't want to feel like you're preaching.
yeah,
But like, if a movie is go like, this is getting into a whole different discussion of like how legitimate the Oscars even are. But I feel like there's a pretty common perception that like if you're gonna be one of the best pictures of the year, you should have like interesting subtext, or there should be stuff there to analyze with your movie about like what's it saying, not necessarily about society, but just within its own narrative. And this is really just, oh man, Arthur Fleck really is a poor guy. All this stuff happened to him. Like this movie, I don't think has all that much interesting to say about mental illness. It doesn't have all that much to say about, like I said, the whole anti-capitalist thing. Or well, the one thing that it maybe does have to say about the system and mental illness is like, and again, this is one of the bigger twists of the movie, is when it turns out that his mom is herself mentally ill, and her own illness mixed with his whole like pseudo bulbar condition kind of stopped her from protecting him and led to him being abused and stuff, and no one picked up on it until it was way too late, even though the system should have been able to care for both of them. Like that's the beginnings of an idea, but I feel like the movie kind of glosses over it.
Um, see, that's the thing. I don't see. My problem is not that the movie isn't um, giving me a whole bunch of explanations for the platitudes and pushing some big mission statement. It's just not. It's not very like it's a movie that's captivating to watch, um, mainly because of Joaquin Phoenix and the story itself. Um, I can kind of take or leave, to be honest.
Yeah, and like you and I have both been keeping up with other people who've talked about this movie, and a lot of the people I follow feel kind of the same way I do, but a lot of others who are like really, really into it, I feel like I watched two different movies just because like you saw the Collider spoiler video, right?
I didn't finish the whole thing, but I saw like half of it.
And like early on in that video, we have people earnestly calling this movie dangerous, and like I don't get it. Like
Yeah, I don't get that either. Why is this more dangerous than any other rated R film? Just because the main character is mentally ill, or like, are we so like shocked to see a character in a comic movie committing violence when we've had Sin City and the Blade movies and Logan? I mean, we're acting like this is the first movie that's ever been remotely risque and dark. It's been in
yeah,
the
and
comic.
like I could buy it if it was the mental illness element, or if it was the social element of the anti-rich thing, or like the abuse of power stuff or whatever. And like if they were saying dangerous ideologically and not just in terms of violence or whatever, then fine. But that element isn't present either. Like there's nothing dangerous about this movie on a like rated R violence risque level, or on a like the ideas being expressed level. Like if if they meant this movie was dangerous violence wise, or dangerous in terms of the ideology, or like seeing,
If you're mentally ill and you watch this movie, you'll start murdering people.
not even that, just like a movie can be disturbing without being violent. And like this movie is a downer. It's There are certainly things that happen that are effectively off-putting and like disturbing for the characters, and I empathize with the characters, but like is there anything in this movie that I think, like, let me put it this way. I think unless you're a really young child, there's nothing, or like really sensitive to gun violence, then there's pretty much nothing in this movie that I don't think just any person could watch and be totally fine with. Like I don't think there's any, like people talk about this movie like I came away from it like really thinking about the ideas and really thinking about what happened, and like stuff happens in this movie that's like haunting to me. And I'm like, I'm thinking about this movie a lot after I watched it, just because I'm kind of a little bit let down by it in a lot of ways. And again, I want to reiterate, I like this movie. I think it's good, but the people who are like, "Oh man, I'm going to be thinking about this movie for days and weeks on end with all the stuff that it had to say about society." And like, it really doesn't have anything to say. This is a very simple, very
Well, I mean,
surface,
it maybe
straightforward
does
movie.
have some stuff to quote unquote say, but we're just not talking about it all that much. We're just, I mean, we have Joker come out in that scene towards the end where he's just talking to, what is his name, Murray,
Yeah.
about how society didn't pay attention to him and abandoned him and treated him horribly and that kind of thing. Like people are inherently just awful and
Well,
like
like, yeah,
all that I feel like is there in the movie for you to see.
that's
Um,
true. And there are people who have made complaints about like whether or not that speech lines up with that character. Like Eric on Geek Evolution made that complaint. Edward on Facebook had an issue with that speech not feeling quite in character. I don't necessarily
I
have
don't
that
disagree
problem.
with that. Like the character as he's presented and portrayed in this movie, I don't I completely disagree with that. Like I don't feel like it's out of character at all.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm on the fence about it, just because I get where they're coming from, where Arthur spends the movie being like so self-interested, and suddenly he's talking about not just himself but other people like him. And like that element feels a little bit forced, but like not enough to where it takes me out of that scene.
or enough for me to even call it out of character.
Yeah, no. But like again, that's all very sort of trite, very typical of these kind of movies stuff. And like I don't it's just I'm really caught at a crossroads between being decently compelled by this movie the whole way through, thinking that certain scenes are really good, and like not really as a movie. Just if I were to sit down and watch this in a vacuum, then I would have almost nothing to complain about. The thing is, it doesn't exist in a vacuum, and it kind of fails not only to differentiate itself from a bunch of other movies like it, it also, if it's not going to do that, at least could be more of a Joker movie than it is. And I get it, it's an origin story, but and like again to reference Geek
To get
Evolution,
around that, I think they would have had to take the Deadpool approach, which is still doing the origin, but not necessarily doing it in order.
yeah. And like again, I'm torn on it. Like I'm torn because much like Geek Evolution, they have a whole point about like this is a really good performance on the level of like I kind of want to see this Joker go up against the Batman, and it kind of sucks that we're never going to see that. But on the other hand, someone on Twitter, actually, I forget who it was, raised a good point where I was like, you know, I can't really argue that. Where they were like, okay, but what does this Joker actually have in common with any other version of the Joker in a meaningful way, apart from the fact that he's crazy and he laughs a whole bunch? Like, the Joker is a character who can be very different. His philosophy can be different. His like attitude can be different, whether he's a guy who's more happy or if he's a guy who's more down or if he believes in something or if he just believes in
Yeah,
chaos or
much
he's
like Batman, there's a bunch of interesting ways you can do the Joker.
yeah
And in Rebirth, he's presented as like being perpetually angry and wanting to be able to crack a smile and laugh. And there's like, I think our first introduction to him, one of our introductions to him is having a whole bunch of people do stand up for him, and he's just like, yeah, no, that wasn't funny, and then just shoots them. Like if they can't make him laugh, he just kills them.
yeah. And like again, this movie kind of does have the uphill battle of being an origin story to get around that, but it's also just like even by the end you question like did this need to be a Joker movie at all? No. And Todd Phillips is very open about that. In interviews, he's like, I didn't really want to make a Joker movie. I just wanted to make this movie, and I decided, hey, let's sneak it into the system and get a lot of eyes on it by naming it Joker. And, like, on some level, I respect that. But on another level, I feel like that's kind of, I don't know. You're kind of asking for a somewhat, you're asking for people to have a bit of a problem with that if they care about the Joker character at all, and you're just gleefully like, I made a Joker movie that's not really a Joker movie at all. And like again, it's mainly down to Joaquin's performance where I'm like, would I watch this guy in a straight up Batman movie? Yes, I would. But at the same time, if I think about it, I'm like, did this need to be a Joker movie for any reason? I don't think so.
I mean, why are we asking that question if we want to praise the movie for being so realistic and game changing?
And like again, if it were more game changing, if it actually was a game changing movie, then I would maybe not have that problem. But again, it's like there's and this is admittedly kind of an issue with comic book movies as a whole, or like an issue, quote unquote, if you want to call it that, where they exist in the sphere of comic book movies, which are everywhere now, but they also just have to exist as regular movies. And within the sphere of comic book movies, this one is very unique and very different, but in the sphere of movies as a whole, I just don't feel it. And like the ideal would be something like Logan, which I feel like is a very unique little movie unto itself, and also unique as far as comic book movies go. And the opposite end of the spectrum is like the MCU movies, where they've pretty much created the comic book movie standard, so they all feel kind of samey as far as being under the comic book film umbrella. Take them out of that umbrella and put them next to the wider film sphere, and they all feel way more unique. This is like, this is kind of the opposite end of that spectrum. I'm glad it exists as a comic book movie and that we can now hopefully get more experimental comic book movies under that umbrella. But compare it to the other genre that it is in, which is like this kind of psychological thriller, like descent into insanity type story, and it's really, really samey and kind of not pushing any boundaries.
I want to go ahead and like get this off my chest since really enough this didn't come up when I first started talking, but just going into this movie, like I'm so sick of the Joker just as a character. I feel like he's so overused and played out. Like I'd be happy never seeing that character again in any medium. Like that's where I'm at with the Joker.
Huh?
Um,
I won't quite go that far, just because, like, I get it. I totally get where you're coming from. Just any character being that overexposed can be an issue. And, like, I have
and
that.
Batman has one of the best rogues gallery in all comics. Like service his other villains. Like, can anyone point to a great um, Mr. Freeze story?
Well, I mean, outside of a couple token episodes from the animated series, probably not.
My
And,
point
like,
exactly.
I really hope that Joker isn't in the Robert Pattinson Batman movie, just because it seems like they're casting a whole bunch of villains. And with Joker having his own movie now, I want that movie to be like, let's give the other Batman villains like a whole time to shine. But at the same time, like, I totally get what you're saying. And I even have that with Batman to an extent. And I wonder if Batman would feel less oversaturated if we got more mainstream stories with him that weren't Joker stories. And yet at the same time, I'm like, I've seen enough.
Every single Arkham game has to incorporate that character. Even um, Origins,
Even Origins, yeah. Which,
which was pretending to be a Black Mask story, and then like, nope, he's Joker.
yeah. But yeah, it's an the thing is just whenever I start to get that feeling of just like, all right, I'm so done, I don't want to see this character again, a version will come along that does enough that's new and different that it doesn't bother me, and I'm like, okay, if we had to have another new version of the Joker, I'm glad it's this one. So, and like again, I just this I knew this was gonna happen, where this video was going to be mainly us picking apart this movie, just because by all the standards it kind of set for itself, I think it's really kind of a letdown. But
Like, and see, I
again,
don't even think that's well. Maybe that is partially its fault. Um, but this, I mean, this felt like an Oscar baiting movie from the way it was promoting itself and also the way everyone's been talking about it who has seen it. And now having seen it, I don't think it's fair to necessarily call it Oscar bait. I do think it is better than that. At the same time, I had an interesting experience with this movie where I'm watching this and I'm kind of captivated by it. But this is not a movie that I would really go back to for any reason other than to maybe experience um, the performance of Michael Phoenix again.
Yeah, I'm kind of right there with you. Like, the thing is, part of me wants to sit down with this movie again just to see if I feel any different knowing what's coming, and like if maybe I was being a bit unfair to it. But at the same time, I kind of don't feel like I have to, aside from the performance. Like, if I sit down with this movie again, which to be fair, I'm probably going to when I inevitably have to make like ranking the comic book movies of the year lists, but it's probably going to be out of a sense of like, was I fair to it? Was I not? And also just this performance is really good and it's worth sitting through the movie for that performance again. But as a whole, like, I think you're right. It is only partially the movie's own fault. I probably would feel way different if people, if the controversy that came up, ugh, if the controversy that came up didn't get like so ridiculously over the top, then I would probably not. I would probably have different expectations. I would probably view it differently. But again, I don't know. You've got people. Who knows what would have happened if this movie had been allowed to just come out without anyone being like, "Oh, maybe it's dangerous." If that idea hadn't
See,
been,
Nick,
yeah,
that doesn't affect my enjoyment of the movie whatsoever.
I don't think it
Um,
does.
that you have a bunch of tone deaf people saying, "Well, maybe this movie's dangerous and it's going to influence people in a horrible way." That's that's not where really any of my issue lies, and that didn't really affect my enjoyment of the movie at all. Um, I think that I think that it's an interesting movie to just watch. Um, but okay, go back to what you're saying. I'm having a difficult time just formulating my thoughts here, but
Yeah,
I
I'm
just
sorry. There's background noise at my place. I can't control that. But yeah, my main thing is just that if this movie had been allowed to come out without the sort of controversy around it, I wonder if we would have people like the Collider crew who come out of the movie calling it dangerous. Like, I don't know if anyone comes out of this movie thinking that kind of thing about it, if that wasn't already part of the discussion around it for like a couple of months. If this movie had just been allowed to, like, you know, have its trailers come out like any other movie, I don't think people would be calling it dangerous. I don't think anyone would. I don't think anyone would be concerned about its messaging. I don't think anyone would be concerned about the level of violence because there's hardly anything there. And I think we're only even having this discussion at all because of the degree to which the discourse has ballooned. Like, to put it simply, I don't think it's possible to talk about this movie on its own terms. And that's not entirely fair, but this is really a unique circumstance where this movie really unfairly kind of had this whole discourse. This movie had been talked about as if it had been released for a month before it even got released. Most people on the planet hadn't seen this movie before we were having big, like, media landscape wide discussions about, is it appropriate? Should it even come out? Is it like going to impact people in some way? And just like, had we known in advance that this is the movie that we were going to get, I don't think we'd have had those discussions. I think we would be able to talk about it just as the movie it is, which is in some ways standard, in some ways not standard, but I cannot separate this movie from the discussion around it. That's not fair, But as a human being who's lived through that, I can't separate this movie from the discussion around it by the director, by the people who had seen it, by the people who hadn't seen it, by the choices made by theaters to present this movie in a certain way, and just all of those factors taken into account when I sit down with it, it's ultimately just some movie. And that's unfortunate and a bit of a letdown.
I don't really have that, like, at all. Like, the outside discourse, I don't let that affect my viewing of a movie.
I'm generally the same way, but this I think, like, I totally understand that you don't have that. But for me, this movie is a unique circumstance where I wish I could ignore it, but it's, again, to quote the old Captain Logan maxim, you're not really reviewing a movie, you're reviewing your experience with the movie. And my experience with this movie was going in knowing all of this ridiculous controversy and hoping that the movie would just be allowed to stand on its own and not like feed into that at all. And then it's almost to the opposite extreme where it's so not related to the controversy, the actual movie itself. I'm just like, oh, well, this movie really didn't have anything to say, I guess, or anything on its mind. And like, again, I keep saying that it didn't have anything to say. And like, you, I don't think entirely wrongly take that to mean like overt messaging, like soapboxy type stuff. That's not what I mean. I wanted this movie to be about something, and I feel like it's only about stuff in name only, really. And that's unfortunate.
Uh, okay. I mean, I don't think that makes it a bad movie.
No, and again, I'm not saying this is a bad movie. I'll repeat it as many times as I have to. I like this movie. I think it's good. In certain scenes, I think it's great. But it's just, it's fine. It's Ant-Man. It's a solid movie. It's fine.
Um, I'd like to know if you had this. When you first saw the scene of Arthur getting called down to talk to Murray in the beginning of the movie, did you know that was just in his head?
You mean, did I think it was?
Did you
Because,
did you know did you know in that scene that it was just in his head? Because I questioned it. Well, at first I didn't really question it at all. But then as the movie progressed, I was like, oh, that scene didn't really happen.
wait, how could it not have? They wouldn't have let him on the show if it didn't.
Wait a minute. The scene of him getting like called down
Oh,
to
you
say, hey,
mean,
introduce yourself on stage, and
oh yeah, the like early in the movie when he's like,
yeah, I'm not talking about him doing the stand up and then like
oh, okay.
like getting it televised on the talk show. That's not what I'm talking about.
No. Yeah,
Earlier,
okay. Him
yeah,
like in the crowd and stuff. Yeah, as soon as that scene started, I knew it was fake. Just
okay.
because of the way that we cut from him on the bed to that, I'm like, this is clearly the same show, like the same broadcast that he's watching on the bed with his mom. So like, yeah, I feel like I was supposed to know from the word go that that was in his head.
Um, like the stuff with Zazie Beetz was so bizarre. Like when he walks into the room and just kisses her, I'm like, what the heck is going on?
Yeah, like I I didn't know what to make of that in the moment, and like in retrospect, it's really really obvious that like he's imagining her and stuff.
Yeah,
Like
like she's
when
hanging out with him and rubbing his back at his mother's bedside when she's in the hospital. And like, what's really weird is when she said she would go see a stand up, and then the stand up happens. I'm like, oh, this is gonna be really bad. Like they're all gonna start throwing tomatoes at him, and he's gonna wig out, and start murdering people. That didn't happen. They all just kind of eventually started laughing and going along with what he was saying. And even she started laughing. I was like, that doesn't really follow what was happening throughout most of the beginning of that scene, but
well,
okay.
well here's the thing with that scene, because the way that I took it and the way that I think we're supposed to take it before the reveal happens is like he he's nervous, and so because of his condition, he can't even get a joke out. And then, like, the sound kind of fades, and we don't really hear what he
What
continues
he's
to
saying.
say. Yeah, we just
Yeah,
hear the laughter sort of faintly. I think we were meant to take that as after he kind of gets the nervous laughter under control and actually starts to deliver some material, they kind of start to like it. But like even then, I was like,
that's what I got too. But I'm like,
that
that's
that
I don't know
sounds
if I buy
very
that. Like that seems really easy. Why would you just mute out the scene, like not tell us what he's saying that's getting them to laugh?
yeah. Like that felt to me in the moment of like they don't want us the audience to actually hear his quote unquote good material, so we're gonna leave that there and just assume that the audience liked it. And then later on it turns out no, that
That never
wasn't.
even happened.
Yeah. And like really we should have known from as early as her showing up at his apartment and being like, "Were you following me?" And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "Huh, I figured. Hey, you want to go out sometime?" It's like that would not.
That was the biggest red flag. I'm like that would never happen. That would never happen.
Yeah,
I'm
no.
like, what is going on right now? Like me and my buddy, who I work together, Williams, we both looked at each other and we were like, no, no, what is happening right now?
Yeah, no. And it's like this movie kind of has the Detective Pikachu thing, where like stuff like that kind of twist is stuff that I would call going in, and like especially when he just go like you said, just goes in and like starts macking on her. Like
And
no,
she
that
just goes along with it. And you're
like the
like,
fact that he would
what?
do it in the first place, like that's not this guy. He doesn't have
It's
that
not.
kind of confidence. But at the same
No.
time, like it's a testament that I'm engrossed enough with Arthur as I am that I don't immediately just go like, "Oh, that means she's not real." Like that conclusion I don't come to until it's revealed, and that I think is just the movie keeping me engaged with it, that I'm not like trying to think about it on that level. And like people have pointed out like the way that this movie begins and ends with him in the asylum, like we know that he's in the asylum before the story starts and it ends with him in it again. You could kind of do the Inception thing where you question, is any of this movie real? Was this
Yeah,
all
it's
just
one
a
of the most interesting, like, unreliable narrator movies I've ever seen. I'll give it
yeah.
that. I think
The un
that's the.
the
Go ahead.
the unreliable narrator element of it is probably the most interesting part of it.
Yeah, that's the biggest compliment I can give it, aside from Joaquin's performance.
Yeah.
That and the score. I mean,
There's a
score,
lot.
cinematography. There are a number of great things about this movie.
Yeah, there's a lot to praise in this movie. Like the scene when he kills his coworker and the other guy is there and he like lets him off and he can't reach the lock and he's like, "Oh my god. Arthur
And
can't get the
he
lock."
like screeches at the guy as he tries to get past him and scares him.
And he's like, "Go ahead, get out of here." It's like that's a great scene. That's legitimately great. And like when he drops the gun in front of all the kids at the hospital, and he's just like, "Shh, don't tell anyone." It's like that's great. In token moments, I think this movie like becomes genuinely a great film, and for the most part, I'm just like I'm along for the ride. I don't think this is on any level a bad movie. I just think that for the discussion around it, for the movie that it's kind of trying to be, there are other versions of this movie that are stronger and like narratively. And for all of the people talking about it, like it's kind of the second coming of Logan, it's like it's really not. It's just, it's a good, decent, solid movie. And I feel like we've already kind of given it more time than it's worth. Not to be mean, but like I wanted us to be like 35 minutes and then get out, and we probably already passed that. I don't know how long the final edit of this conversation is going to be. And like to be fair, I've rambled a lot, but like yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's Ant-Man. It's a very simple, shallow movie with a lot of great things in it, and it had all the ingredients for a great movie, To quote Martin from Double Toasted, it had all the ingredients for a great movie, and I'm kind of just let down that it wasn't that great movie. It's just a good movie.
Like I said, I mean, my expectations weren't necessarily high, and that I thought it would kind of be just, hollow Oscar bait, which it's it's not. It's really not. It's better than that. It deserves more credit than that. But um, like I didn't want this movie. Like I was against the very existence of this movie. Just being sick of this character in general. So
Mm.
um, I guess I'm glad it's as good as it was. Um, and I do appreciate that it is just a standalone thing and that it's not DCU. I mean, yeah, I guess it sucks that we're never going to see this version of Joker interact with Batman. But that's the thing is, I don't need that. Like,
And
I'm sick of it.
that said, before we end out, do you want to talk about the inclusion of the Waynes at all? Because I know some people who feel like just them being in this movie, to the extent that they are, is really forced.
I don't
And
know if it's necessarily forced, especially because like him finding out that he's not actually the bastard son of Thomas Wayne is another thing that kind of sends him over the edge.
yeah, it's another one of those. On the one hand, one of my smaller issues, just because it's like this is one of those things where at the very end of the movie, when he says like he's laughing about something and someone's like something funny, and it's like I just thought of an old joke, and he's like, "Can you explain it to me?" There's like cuts to Bruce standing over his dead parents in the alley, and he's like, "You wouldn't get it." Like by itself, that's a great moment. In context, I don't know if that works because there's no reason that he should know that happened. And also, it's kind of symptomatic of just like I don't know if this it's another one of those did this need to be a DC Joker thing at all thing where it's like did those characters need to be the Waynes? Could have been really any rich guy, honestly.
I mean, why do they? Why is that a criticism? Like, why do you have to justify having certain characters in the movie?
Just because if it's I see where you're coming from, where it's like I can do whatever I want. It's my movie. I can put in whatever character I want. But if there's no like if there's no special reason for it to be Bruce and Thomas Wayne, why not just name him something different? It's like it feels like Mr.
I mean, did it
Magooly, I
have to
think.
be? Did it have to be Jameson being the news anchor that reveals Spider-Man's identity in Far From Home?
Yes, because J. Jonah Jameson is the news guy who has it out for Spider-Man. Like, there's nothing connecting the Joker and the Waynes typically, and like clearly you didn't really want to make this a like a DC Comics like standard Joker Batman mythos type thing. So it's just kind of like it's not even a complaint in as much as oh it's a problem with the movie that it's the Waynes. It's less of a problem and more of a questionable decision. Just like I'm not complaining about it, but I question it. Like what was the purpose?
Just to have a fun, like kind of Easter egg esque type thing in the movie.
I guess. I don't know.
But again, I don't mind that. I that's not even something I would. I mean, I would bring it up insofar as it's a thing that happens in this movie. Like the Waynes are here, and we think for a good chunk of the first act that he is actually the bastard son of Thomas Wayne, and that he and Bruce are related. Um,
Which
when,
watch like 5 or 10 years down the line when we do another like alternate universe Batman story where that is the case and that's true. Give it a while. We're gonna do it eventually because of this movie. That's going to actually happen.
that would make my brain explode.
I'm willing to bet money that it happens at some point.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll do that in the comics, and they'll keep that running for maybe all of 2, 3 years, and then I immediately retcon it.
Or just like they do a self-contained little Elseworld thing. I could see that happening. Or a TV show or something.
Come on, Bruce, you wouldn't send your brother to Arkham, would you?
But yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm honestly.
I will say that's one of and even from the trailer, I got the indication that that was Bruce Wayne. I'm glad I was right about it. Like him making Bruce Wayne smile is haunting.
Yeah. But yeah, you know, this I've said my piece. I cut you off in the middle of your final words. Sorry.
No, I'm more or less with you. I'm ready to end it out. This is a movie that I liked. Okay, surprisingly, I liked it a lot better than I thought I would. Um, but yeah, it's not the masterpiece, at least in my opinion. It's not the masterpiece it's been heralded as. It's shot beautifully. It's very well made. The score is incredible. Joaquin Phoenix is incredible. Um, but the movie as a whole, I cannot put to that factory. I just can't do it.
Yeah,
It's a decent, solid movie though. I'll give it that.
it's a movie that I liked, and I'm bothered that I didn't like it more. And that's about it.
All right, guys, let us know what you think of this movie in the comments.
Yeah, I guarantee we're going to get a smattering of different thoughts. But yeah, thank you for listening, and goodbye.